Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show.
Tales from the Loop is an Amazon show set in the quirky 1970s-ish town of Mercer, a place full of inventors and wacky creations. Episode 3, Stasis, is focused on the character of May, Jakob's love interest from last week, and we follow her through her day-to-day life, with her slightly strict mum and her quiet fishing-loving dad, and her obsession with how the first moment of falling in love always seems to fade away. And she finds a strange device in the lake while fishing, and after playing with it a bit realises that it's run out of fuel. But then she ends up meeting Ethan, a quiet lad with a wonky foot, who likes being on his own and is very different to Jakob, her boyfriend. So she starts to hang out with him in secret, and they wander around, and he helps her steal a power supply for the strange device, and eventually things get a little bit more intimate when her mum catches them and she ends up getting in trouble. And that night she tests the machine and finds out that it pauses time for whoever's wearing the bracelets. And the next day at school, she gives one to Ethan, and when they turn it on, everyone freezes, and they can explore the world that's now theirs and theirs alone. And they do all the things you'd kind of expect, like pranking people a bit, or getting drunk, and having a quick bit of nookie right in the middle of a busy street. And they decide that they're just going to stay like this and move themselves into a big fancy house, help themselves to whatever food they can find around, and spend an awful lot of time in bed together. But eventually the day comes when they start to talk about what's going to happen when they go back, and Meg is a wee bit cagey about it, and she's also cagey about whether or not she's going to break up with Jakob, which makes both of them a little bit uncomfortable. And then they decide to turn the machine off, but wouldn't you know, it's not working because it's run out of fuel again. So off they trot to try and find a new bit of fuel, and that leads them to the repairman's house where they find a battery, and then May sees a familiar pair of earrings that belong to her mum. And she gets furious, and Ethan tries to calm her down, but he does it kind of badly, and both of them end up saying things that they can't really take back.
Why are you being like a bitch?
Don't call me a bitch, you cripple.
And he ends up walking away, heartbroken, and she realises that she hasn't seen her mother that happy as she is in this moment in a long time. And May chases out after Ethan and finds him by the lake where she first saw him. And after pouring out her heart to him, she realises that he's unclasped the bracelet and he's frozen like everyone else. So she turns off the machine, and both of them sadly go back to their lives separately. And her dad offers her some sage advice because, she seems sad.
Sometimes things are special because they don't last.
And then when she bumps into Ethan on the street, she realises that her dad was right, and that even though they had a good time together, that time has passed, and it's time to move on. So what did I think? Well, I was actually quite surprised that the focus character this week was May, because, as I said, I kind of figured it would be one of the other characters from last week, because she didn't even have any lines. Although, looking up the actress, I suppose I should have realised it was her, because she's actually been in a bit more stuff than most of the other teenage actors in the show. And both her and Danny Kang, who plays Ethan, were absolutely fantastic this week. And you see, this is what acting looks like. The director's actually gone to town to get a real naturalistic, nuanced performance out of these actors. And there's weight and depth to the little pauses and the minute facial expressions that they make. And this is one of the reasons I actually like this show, despite it being occasionally a little slow and a little thin on actual storylines. And it's not just them. I think they did some fantastic work this week setting up the whole idea of the mother and her being unhappy, and then the little nods about the techie guy affair that she's having. Like when they steal the fuel source, he couldn't actually bring himself to look at May or talk properly. He sort of starts stumbling his words. And I wondered about that. I thought, oh god, it's not because he fancies her or something. But no, it's actually because he's literally sleeping with her mother, and he couldn't bring himself to actually talk in front of her because he was uncomfortable. I thought that plotline was actually quite clever, as you had both May and her mother sleeping with somebody else behind their partner's back, both of them keeping secrets and both being unhappy in their public lives while happy in secret. They're really two peas in the same pod, and that's what May kind of realises at the end, and I felt the touch of her dropping her earrings back to her mum at the end shows that she knows what's going on, but it's uncomfortable, but it's a form of connection, even if it's a difficult connection. And a lot of this episode really seemed to be about May growing out of this childish whimsy and thinking that the first blush of love is really all that matters, and that presumably you'd expect that she's going to grow from a person and be a better partner and a better person in her next relationship. But, as ever with this show, it's still got that same stumbling block the first two episodes had. You see, Tales from the Loop clearly wants to tell simple sci-fi stories in an aesthetically beautiful way, and it kind of works. Nothing is ever too unexpected in the show. The inevitable story beat for a plot like this, a time-stopping thing, which actually is a massive thing. There was actually a movie directed by Jonathan Frakes, Riker from Star Trek, entirely about this, about freezing time. And it's something that pops up in sci-fi stories all the time. I mean, just Google it. Actually, maybe don't Google it, because I Googled it and an awful lot of the stuff I found is actually porn. So maybe don't look at that, or if you do like that, keep it to yourself. But the inevitable story, as I said, is that they're going to end up getting stuck outside of time. And I was fully expecting that the ending would find May trapped alone there forever in this sort of like statue prison that she can't ever get out of, as a sort of narrative punishment for like the hubris of wanting to do this. Which, I mean, that'd be keeping with how nasty last week's episode was with what happened to Jakob. What surprised me that at no point up to this did the pair ever actually talk about the practicalities of what was going on. And I know it's not really that kind of show, but it bugged me a little bit because they never try, even vaguely try and put things back at the end when they were. I mean, when they decide to reset the machine, literally in bed in the big expensive house, I mean, wouldn't it make more sense to have at least gone back to the school, you know, to have made the bed? I mean, think about the practicalities of this. They've been banging in this bed for a month and odds, and they can't run washing machines because everything's frozen, so machines shouldn't work. So, you know, presumably the whole place is a mess. They've left the entire town in a horrible, horrible mess, and they're just going to reset it and just go, that's fine. But they don't even put themselves back in the same place, so that they'd be the people who'd be like, where did they suddenly disappear to? But from a story perspective, yeah, sure, they couldn't just do that there, and it meant that the pair are kind of a thoughtless and selfish couple. I mean, that's very clear. But it also surprised me that he didn't just slip the bracelet off earlier, that nobody tested doing that. And in fact, it was my worry right at the start, since it seemed like it was big enough that it would slip straight off like May's wee wrist, because the actress has very small wrists and hands. And I was semi-prepared for May to deactivate the time machine and something horrible was going to happen, like because he'd actually just taken it off. Like maybe he'd go suddenly into fast forward and age to death like the guy in Indiana Jones or something like that. But no, and I'm kind of glad it didn't go there. It was nice to have a week that was slightly less nasty. But the real issue here is that the stories that the show is telling are really simple, really basic, really facile. If you want to have a lot of plot to carry the audience along, and you want a slow show that's quiet and pretty, that's okay, because people are doing things that keep you entranced. But this is a lot of shots of people walking about and doing very little, so there's loads of time for your brain to go into absolute overdrive, thinking up possible story turns and wonder what's happening. And I mean, at least my brain does. I'm sitting there going, oh, I wonder what would happen. Oh, well, nothing much is happening, so I'll think about it. So certainly your brain's working a lot faster than the kids in these episodes. And I did wonder if someone else was going to pop up, like some kind of fellow freeze time traveller type person. Like whoever had actually tossed the thing into the lake in the first place. Maybe that was somebody who decided he didn't ever want to go back to the real time, and that was, you know, what was going to happen. A bit like there was this film called Cashback, which is like a wee indie British movie where a guy occasionally has like daydreams about things like that, and there's a point in the film where some other random guy just invades and runs past, and it never really explains it. Anyway, it's a random but fun film. You should maybe check it out. And there was a few other little minor things, like they're basically going at it like rabbits through a month and odds, and they also had a mid-street quickie that it didn't appear that they used any kind of protection there, so I don't know, I was worried that May might end up with some kind of time baby or something, but clearly that's not where the story was going. But looking at it as a series, I can still say I'm enjoying the show, and I'm curious as to what's going to happen next. And one thing I could say is that obviously it'll be somebody else that it'll be looking at next week, and I wondered if it's maybe this guy, because this moment felt really forced.
Sent here from another dimension to see what makes us tick.
And sure, yeah, that was a repeat motif of a running joke in the show about them coming up with ideas about who people are. But I just thought, we've seen that guy before in the first episode, and this seems oddly specific. So I wonder if that was a sly nod about him maybe being not all he appears to be. But, I mean, as I said, this show is not entirely subtle all the time. But I could be completely wrong, so let's just see what happens next time. So till then, I've been Ian. And these have been my grumpy opinions. And a special thanks to everybody listening, and especially my patrons, and most especially to Michelle Forbes and Judith Coloma, my top tier patrons. Thank you everybody. Everybody stay safe. Cheerio.